thing that is very much in the news right now in Sweden is that we have, or in Europe, we have a huge refugee crisis. What is your view on the policy prospects for an unequal society that is free? How should we react to this crisis? How should we handle the immigrants?
So there's a number of issues here that have to be untangled, right? Why are all the refugees want to go to two countries? Sweden and Germany. I mean, every single one I've seen interviewed on television. How do we get to Germany and then to Sweden? I mean, that's the path. Why? Because when they arrive here, you give them a check. Hey, I might immigrate. And then you give them a home. Even though there's from what I understand, there's a housing shortage in Sweden for you young Swedes, but they get a home. So you created a perverse incentive in welfare state Europe that anybody can get a check. I mean, that's absurd. So the welfare state needs to go. Right? So in a free world, you wouldn't have a welfare state. So the magnet, at least that particular magnet, wouldn't exist. Instead of people coming here because they want to work, because they want to produce, because they want to be part of a society, they're coming here in order to leech off of you, which is wrong. So that's one aspect of it, right? It's the existence of a welfare state. But there's a second complexity, and this is politically incorrect to say, but I'm not politically correct. And that is that I believe the West is at war. I believe there's a war going on, a civilizational war, if you will, between the West and between radical Islam. And we haven't declared this war, but if there's a war going on that we refuse to acknowledge because we've stuck our head deep in the sand, then if there is a war, you can't just let the enemy, because most of the immigrants are Muslim. Now, I don't know what percentage of them are radical Muslims, but nobody knows because nobody cares, right? You can't just let the enemy into your territory. America didn't allow Nazis into America during World War II. So
we are the one that's selling most weapons in Middle East, the Swedish people, the Swedish government.
Yeah, I'm not saying why the war exists. We can talk about why the war exists and who's at fault. But the point is that if there's a war, you don't allow the enemy in. So you have to decide if there's a war or not. I believe there is one, and that should be a reason to have a barrier. And then you have to do something about the welfare state. It's not just, it's not fair, it's not right that people can just show up at your door and receive goodies. I mean, that comes at somebody's expense, and why take from them in order to give? So, in a free society that's not at war, then I believe in open migration. The people should be able to move, and I'm an immigrant, I did this, my kids, I mean, I come from a long line of wandering Jews, right? So my kids are fourth generation born on a different continent, right? So they were born in the US, I was born in Israel, my parents were born in South Africa, their parents were born in Lithuania. Right? My wife's mother was born in Morocco, her father was born in what was then Palestine, and her father's grandparents were born in Uzbekistan. So, yeah, we cross borders, we move, cool. So I'm all for migration, but it shouldn't be at people's expense. Nobody paid me to go to America. Nobody gave me a check, right? Nobody paid my ancestors to go to, my grandparents to go to South Africa when they left Lithuania. They were kind of running because they were being killed, but, so they had a strong incentive to leave. Just like these migrants have a strong incentive to leave now. I mean, they're being killed. It's horrible what's going on in Syria and the rest of the Middle East. And the rest of Africa. But, yeah.
And that war started because of the United States, yeah?
No.
Why did it went to war with Iraq?
Well, let's put Iraq aside a second. But the war in Syria is not about Iraq.
But that was from
the war in Syria started before ISIS.
It was there it started, yeah?
But look, I mean, let's get Syria right. We had Bashar al-Assad, a brutal dictator.
Your opinion?
No, not in my opinion.
Whose opinion?
Fact.
Okay.
There's such a thing as reality and there's such a thing as fact. He's a dictator. Was he elected? No. Did you have free speech in Syria? No. If you did something that he didn't like, did you go to jail and were you tortured? Yes. I mean, he's a dictator. I mean, that's not an issue of opinion. Now, some people benefited from the dictator, like with all dictators. Some people benefit and other people don't benefit. But the uprising against Assad is the same uprising that started in the late 1970s, early 1980s of the Muslim Brotherhood against his father. And what did his father do when the uprising happened back then? He flattened Homs. He killed 20,000 to 40,000 people. Bashar Assad's father. So Assad inherited the same kind of regime, the same kind of, and again he had an uprising. An uprising led to the current civil war, which was complicated and extended by the fact that the United States made a disaster out of Iraq, which then helped create ISIS, and the whole mess that we have today is a consequence of that. But, okay, well, whoever's fault it is, that's the reality in the Middle East. And the fault at the end of the day is not Americans. The fault is a brutal dictator.
The American went to war with Iraq. Sorry for interrupting.
Sure.
Sorry.
I don't want to really get into the Middle
No,
East
okay,
here.
then never
But look,
mind. Then
but
let it
look.
go.
Iraq was ruled by another dictator. The fault for the problems in the Middle East are the people in the Middle East. They're ruled by dictators. That doesn't end well, ever. Whether America invaded Iraq or didn't invade Iraq, Iraq was a mess. Shiites were being killed by a Sunni president who was gassing his own people. That's not because of America.
No, but I mean, maybe civilian X would have died under one regime, but then as a result of an invasion, some other civilians died.
Sure, no,
So,
again, I don't want to give...
instrumentally, the end result is the same, even if you have a moral background to it that is different, right?
I don't know if instrumentally it's the same. The point is, and the question is the invasion just or unjust? But that's a whole other question. But the problems in the Middle East were not created by the West. The problems in the Middle East are created by people in the Middle East.
Talking about Bashar al-Assad, they have a very big song going on, singing about him, that it goes, Ala Suriya Basar o Bas. Have you heard it before?
No.
No. My point is that it's very, very, in my opinion,
Yeah.
talking about the conflict,
Yeah.
it gets hard to take an angle. In specific case, talking about Middle East.
I think it's relatively easy.
No.
If you know the history, I don't think it's that hard.
Yeah, the government made a 9/11 that the Americans did, and
Well,
then
Americans
they blamed
didn't
them.
create
Okay, but
9/11.
look, let me tell my point of view.
Yeah,
Can I,
okay.
Okay.
Well, it's my stage.
I listened
But-
to you for
but-
like 2 hours. I didn't
Yours.
say it. Okay, then it's your stage. You should speak.
Okay, sorry.
Excuse me, I think we have
Yeah.
one last question.
Yeah.
Okay, another spin on the
Inequality.
refugee.
On the what?
On the refugees. Another spin
On
on it.
refugees, okay.
No, but this is what do you say? Strive in the West for equality
Yeah.
and the focus on it.
Yeah.
But do you think that has impacted much on how we view the refugees or the ones we
Yes.
accept to our borders? I mean, we basically in both Sweden, Germany, and all other European states have said that as long as you're fleeing from a war, it's okay, but not if you want to enhance your chances in life.
Yeah, well, yes. So suffering is a standard for help, which I think is the wrong standard. I don't think that's the standard by which you should decide whether to help or not, or whether to bring people in. But I think it's deeper than that, and I'm going to say some controversial things that are going to upset people, but tough.
You're just telling your point of view.
It's just my point of view. It's
Yeah,
only
your
my
point
point
of
of
view,
view.
yes,
I happen
yes.
to think it's the
Yes,
truth.
yes.
I happen to think it's the truth, but
Your
you don't
truth.
have to agree with me.
No, your truth.
Right? No, I think there is a truth. But again, you don't have to agree with me. You can say I'm full of shit. That's fine. But It's my point of view.
Yeah, your
Um,
point of view.
Lite respekt för den här. Han räcker. Let him talk.
I think the deeper problem in Europe and in the West generally is the issue of multiculturalism. It's the idea that all cultures are equal in some way. And I think this is a deep, deep problem in Europe, and I think a deep, deep problem everywhere. I don't think it's true. Cultures are not equal. And European culture has forgotten or repressed what made it great. I believe that the culture developed in Europe during the Enlightenment is the greatest culture in human history. And I think every culture in the world should emulate it. So the problems in the Middle East, in my view, would be solved if people were free. If people had respect for two concepts that come from Greece originally, but were developed during the Enlightenment in Europe. And those two concepts are reason, as a means of knowing reality, a dedication to reason that went through that period and it's reflected in the founding of America. And because of a dedication to reason, individualism. Individualism comes out of our dedication for reason. Because who reasons? Only individuals reason. So if you combine reason and individualism, they are what make a great culture. And they are what we should be exporting to the world. It's the idea that we should be encouraging every people in the world to embrace. And if you embrace reason and individualism, many of the problems all over the world, South America, Asia, and indeed the countries that have embraced it have done well. And the countries that have not embraced it haven't done well. So to the extent that Asian countries, Japan, to some extent China, certainly South Korea and Taiwan and Hong Kong and Singapore have embraced the ideas of reason and individualism, some explicitly, some implicitly, they've done phenomenally well. Right? To the extent that that other countries have not, they've done very, very poorly. But we in Europe, instead of saying, this is what we stand for, this is what it means to be European, if you will. These are the concepts that we stand behind. This is what, if you want to come here, this is what you should embrace. Just like in America, the idea was, if you come to America, it used to be, if you come to America, you should embrace the idea of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, what they represent. We don't do that in America today, and you don't do it in Europe anymore. And I think that's a disaster.
I buy that, but it was also, my spin was also more that if you focus too much on equality,
You don't give the people the opportunity to rise up who want to rise up.
If the people coming here don't have the same level of income or anything, then you will enhance inequality here. But if you look at the people coming, say people from Somalia or Afghanistan, where there's not really a war, but conditions are harsh, then that would increase inequality here, but you would get another view of the refugee. But this focus on equality basically says that we only allow refugees.
Certain types of
from-
refugees. I think you're right.
Okay.
Can you give some example of these countries that have actually done well in these regards?
Sure. I mean, Japan is an obvious example. Japan, I don't know if you know, when Japan was occupied in the Second World War, MacArthur asked the Japanese to write a constitution. So they wrote a constitution, and he read it, and he said, "This is terrible." And he shredded it. And MacArthur and his assistant, right, General MacArthur and just some guy who was an assistant, wrote the Japanese constitution. And it is the only constitution in the world that has the phrase that every individual has an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which obviously they took from the Declaration of Independence. And it's in the Japanese constitution to this day. Now, Japan has done phenomenally well with that constitution that they didn't want, that was crammed down their throat, but they wouldn't repeal it today because they've done phenomenally well with it. It's allowed them to stay free for the longest period in Japanese history. They've allowed the economy to grow dramatically, standard of living to increase. You know, they're not a military power anymore, which, you know, might change in the future, but at least today, they've done phenomenally well. If you look at South Korea used to be a dictatorship. when they abandoned dictatorship and started respecting individual lives, when they became free, they're rich today. They're one of the richest countries in the world, by far. And they're free, right? Freedom of speech, all the freedoms that we take for granted, they have now. They never had it throughout the history of South Korea. There's never, I mean, look at North Korea. You've got the contrast of the ethnic group, as if that matters, right? South Korea's thrived, and North Korea's are dying. Why? Because one adopted freedom and one didn't. Or you can go on and on. Hong Kong, no natural resources. A rock in the middle of nowhere. Was a fishing village 75 years ago. Today, GDP per capita is the same as the United States. People took rafts to get there. Why? No safety net, no protection. They weren't looking, it goes to your point, they weren't looking for refugees of this or that. Anybody could come, right? And most of the people who came there because they wanted to make a better life. And they worked hard, and today, they're relative to anybody else in Asia, or for that matter, most of the world, they're rich. On a per capita, GDP per capita basis, they're richer than Swedes.
Korea is a really good example, actually.
Yeah, because you
So,
can see it right there. You can see the contrast.
a more practical
He wants me to stop.
Well, we're past 90 minutes. I think it's time. Thank you very much for coming here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's been great. It's a great source of inspiration. And it's really strange to me that not more people agree with what you say.
Strange to me too.
Thank you.